Well, I need to be a little bit more diligent on my Patreon request videos. This one comes to us from Anthony Goodwin. He donated enough to me for an album review, so thank you so much, Anthony, for making me sit down and listen to this album. If you want to be cool like Anthony, I've left the link down below for you to donate to my Patreon requests. I do live streams, I do these album reviews, and later on this week, I might be doing a worst to best. So keep your eyes out for that, and let's get into this really interesting album that I didn't even know existed. Garden Shed by England. So England is a UK progressive rock band from the 70s. They started around 1975 and released Garden Shed in 1977, and these guys came on the progressive rock scene a little bit late, and I would almost say these guys are one of the first like retro prog groups. I mean, they're still kind of in that same era that is progressive rock, even though by 1977 we're kind of out of the golden age of progressive rock. Like, I always kind of figured the prog golden era kind of stopped at 1975. So they're kind of 2 years late. And a lot of the bands of the day that were still rooted in progressive rock weren't necessarily doing this style of music. So in the one hand, this is a really big breath of fresh air for the progressive rock scene of that time. But on the other hand, they're not really presenting any new facets to the prog sphere, and that was something that was very key to the early proggers. You needed to do something very different. You needed to approach music in a very new, dynamic way. And these guys have been said to be kind of a mash between Yes and Genesis, and I mean, I can definitely hear that. I mean, you've got the harmonizations and vocal styles of either like a Peter Gabriel and Phil Collins or a John Anderson and Chris Squire. You also have some of the guitar works very similar to Steve Howe, Steve Hackett, and there's a lot of really fun moments on here. Like the first track of Midnight Madness is probably my favorite track off of the entire album, and it holds such a great keyboard work with this really powerful rhythm section. The rhythm section is like dun 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 dun. So it's got this like really punchy and meaty rhythm section that everybody's kind of coming together on, something that Yes and Genesis is very, very prominent in doing, while having this soaring, almost arpeggio-like keyboard that's flowing over top of it, very similar to either a Rick Wakeman or a Tony Banks, and it's very like that was very, very delicious in that sense. And a lot of these tracks do hold that prog and progressive rock style. As I already mentioned, Midnight Madness, as well as the 3-piece suite, almost 13 minutes, and the final track of Poisoned Youth. All three of these tracks are very, very progressive rock and very prog. And in fact, 3-piece suite actually holds a moment on it that feels like a Clat 2 track from Hope, So Said the Lighthouse Keeper, where it's got this, oh no, it's Loneliest Creature, because it's got this do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, and it's the same section that Hope had, and I'm not quite sure which one came first. It definitely lends itself to the idea of two individual bands coming up with the same idea at around the same time. Now, the 3-piece suite being exactly that, a 3-piece suite is fun, it's fine, it's got 3 very distinct moments on it where each one is just over about 4 minutes long. It goes in a lot of very different directions, but at no point do I really feel all that excited about it. Like, there's no real moment where I'm like, there it is, there's a really great moment. And the same can really be said about Poisoned Youth, and I feel like Poisoned Youth I need a little bit more time to get into, and Poisoned Youth is over 16 minutes in length. And my first handful of listens, I just felt like the big climax of the track happens at the midpoint, and it does feel a little bit like a Supper's Ready clone, especially with the time signature at that midpoint. I feel like they resolve it very, very well, and then we have the final crescendo of the track, but then we have about 5 minutes extra. And at first, I'm like, ooh, I don't know if they structured the song very well. Like, I wonder if they moved that latter piece to the midpoint and move the midpoint to the latter piece, they probably would have had a very well-rounded track. But the more I listen to it, the more I'm understanding what they're doing with this track, and the more I'm getting into it, I'm like, okay, I can kind of see where they're coming from now that I've had a little bit more time with the track. Now, the smaller tracks, All Alone, Parafanala, I think that's how it is, the 4th track, and Yellow. Parafanala, the 4th track, is actually my 2nd favorite track off of this. It's very light, it's very fun, it opens up the 2nd side of the album. I really particularly enjoy that one. It reminds me of something that like a harmonium would have done, in being very light and very fun, and that's something that like Yes was doing about that time as well. And it's also a very light track. Especially after such the big track that ended the first side off of the 3-piece suite. And Yellow is fine. I think Yellow and All Alone are probably the weaker tracks off of this. Yellow I can't really recall all that well, even after listening to this album a handful of times in that sense. Overall, this is still a very enjoyable listen in terms of some classic retro prog, I guess would be the best way to put it, even though the band never really produces anything that's all that original to my ears or all that groundbreaking. It's still a good 50 minutes worth of very solid progressive rock music. I was very, very surprised by what I was listening to. The more I listened to it, the more I got out of it, and I'm very surprised this album has been so overlooked. And I guess a lot of it just had to do with distribution, because it was so hard to find this album. But now that we have the streaming services that we do, it's very readily available, so I would highly recommend this. This is one that I would easily, if I could, pick it up in physical format, because it has all those things that I love about prog. Even though there's, as I mentioned, nothing really new on this album, I still really love the sounds that are on there, the soundscapes that the musicians are providing and inventing. I really love the style and the flavors and the atmosphere of the album. I love how the album's constructed as well. It's got a very clear midsection that I just crave, and that just happens to go with the medium that we find ourselves in. But it's a very beautifully structured album, and one that I will definitely return to throughout this year. So yeah, there you go. There's The Garden Shed from England. What did you guys think? Do you know about this album? If you do, let me know of your thoughts about what you think about it. If you don't, have a listen to it, and then let me know about what you thought about it, because it's getting the note seal of approval. And yeah, that's about it. So thank you so much, everybody, for watching, and especially thank you to Anthony for donating to my Patreon. Again, if you want to be cool like Anthony, I've left the link down below to donate to my Patreon page. Every little bit helps. I've got little rewards for those who donate a little bit more. No matter what the donation rate is, I always thank my patrons on my live streams that I really need to start doing again. So thank you, everybody, for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out. Can you feel it higher? Ever